At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. I mean, in the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name is the Voice Ogre, and let's begin.
It looked too good to be true. When Captain Tavil of the scaled folk of Vaxnir arrived in the distant system along the intergalactic arm, he was met with the sight of a treasure. A planet so perfectly terraformed, yet unclaimed in the galactic registry. Unguarded, utterly unprotected, abandoned as far as he could tell. He stood frozen at the viewing port, his entire body locked in place, as though paralysis had seized his muscles. The blues and greens of the planet below swirled in beautiful patterns across its surface. Oceans, forests, and clouds. His orange eyes, reptilian and sharp, surveyed every visible detail of the world below with an intensity that made them burn. Yet despite the treasure hanging before him like forbidden fruit, despite the racing of his dual hearts in his chest, he still didn't dare order to his crew to transmit the claim. Something whispered in the back of his mind. Some instinct honed over cycles of void travel warned him that perfection this complete came with the price. "Captain," the voice came from behind him, breaking through his reverie like a stone through still water. Tavil recognized the speaker immediately without turning. It was Kamshi, his navigator. The captain finally tore his gaze from the planet and turned slowly, his tail swishing once across the deck plates in a gesture that betrayed his inattention. Several pairs of orange eyes stared back at him from scaled faces throughout the bridge. His crew stood at their stations, bodies rigid, waiting for the decision that would change all of their lives. "The crew awaits your decision, Captain," Kamshi said. Tavil's eyes swept across the bridge once more, taking in each face, each eager expression. Then he began walking slowly toward the communication station. His mind raced through calculations, probabilities, risk assessments. The Galactic Council's laws were clear. First claim, properly registered and paid for, established ownership that other species were bound to respect. Wars had been fought over less valuable worlds than this one. But this planet, this pristine, perfect, inexplicably abandoned world. He stopped beside the communication officer's station and looked down at her. Nimi was too young for her position, her scales still carrying the bright green sheen that would go dull with age. Her orange eyes looked up at him with absolute trust, waiting for his command. "Nimi," he said, "transmit our claim over this planet to the Galactic Council using the FTL comms. Registry codes, coordinates, timestamps, everything." He paused, letting the order sink in. "Then open a supply channel to Vaxnir Prime. Make sure that our people pay the registration fees immediately. I want this claim locked in before anyone else has the chance to contest it." The bridge erupted into motion. Nimi's claws moved fast, initiating the transmission sequences that would beam their claims across the vast distances of space to the Council's central registry. Other crew members began their own tasks, securing data, running confirmations, preparing reports. "Captain," Kamshi said, stepping closer and lowering his voice, though not enough that the others couldn't hear. "Are you not afraid to anger some species that might have kept this place hidden from the Galactic Council? Someone went to great expense to terraform this world. Someone with resources beyond our own. What if they simply chose not to register it? Are you not afraid?" Tavil turned to face his crew, and a laugh bubbled up from deep in his chest. "Afraid? My dear Kamshi, let them be as angry as they wish. Once the Council recognizes our ownership, once the fees are paid and the claim is locked onto the registry, there is nothing that anyone can do. Not without declaring war on both us and the Council itself. And no species, no matter how advanced, no matter how wealthy, is foolish enough to challenge the Council's authority over a single planet. He gestured broadly through the viewing port, toward the beautiful world below. Besides, if they wanted to keep it, they should have registered it themselves. Possession without registration is no possession at all under galactic law. Kamshi didn't look entirely convinced, but he nodded and returned to his station. Tavil watched him go, then called out to the scanning officer. Run a comprehensive scan of the surface. I want locations identified for settlements. Look for flat plains, areas near water sources, temperate zones, places that are optimal for construction and colonization. The scanning officer bent over his console, manipulating the sensor arrays to sweep across the planet's surface. The main tactical screen lit up with topographical data, atmospheric readings, geological surveys. Minutes ticked by in relative silence. Tavil paced the bridge, unable to stand still, his tail swishing back and forth in an unconscious display of his agitation. Captain, the scanning officer called out. I'm finding multiple locations that meet our specifications. But sir, this is unusual. These areas appear to have been intentionally cleared. No vegetation, no wildlife, perfectly level ground. It's as if someone already prepared construction sites as part of the terraforming project. Tavil moved to stand behind the scanning officer, leaning over to study the data himself. The screen showed dozens of marked locations across 3 separate continents, each one a perfect blank slate ready for construction. His orange eyes narrowed as he processed the implications. Prepared construction sites, he murmured. Whoever terraformed this world was planning to colonize it themselves. These were not natural formations. They were intentional. Should we be concerned, Captain? The scanning officer asked. Tavil straightened up, shaking his head. No. This only confirms that the planet was abandoned mid-project. Perhaps the species that started this work simply ran out of resources. Perhaps they were destroyed by war or plague. Perhaps they simply changed their minds. It doesn't matter. What matters is that they left and we arrived. Their loss is our gain. He turned to face the bridge crew, spreading his arms wide. Transfer all this data to Nimi. Have her include detailed maps and site recommendations with the transmission back to Vaxnir Prime. I want our people to send colonists immediately. The faster we establish permanent settlements, the more solid our claim becomes. Aye, Captain. Multiple voices responded in unison. Tavil continued his pacing, but now there was a spring in his step, a confidence that radiated from his posture. He moved to the command chair at the center of the bridge and finally sat down, allowing himself to sink into the worn cushions. His claws drummed against the armrests in an unconscious rhythm. Do you all understand what this means? He said. This planet is worth more than everything our species has claimed in the last 10 cycles combined. When the colonists arrive and begin extraction operations, when settlements grow into cities, when trade routes are established, we will all be rewarded beyond imagination. He leaned forward in his chair, his orange eyes gleaming with ambition. I will make Admiral for this discovery, perhaps Grand Admiral, and each of you, every single member of this crew who is present at this moment, you will receive your due. Your own ships, your own crews to command, positions of the land below, no doubt. We will be celebrated as the pioneers who expanded Vaxnir's territory by an entire world. The crew exchanged excited glances, murmurs of approval and anticipation rippling through the bridge. Some crew members clasped hands with their neighbors. Others raised their fists in gestures of triumph. The atmosphere had transformed from cautious tension to euphoric celebration in the space of minutes. Captain Tavil, Nimi called out from her station, her voice colorful with excitement. Confirmation received from Vaxnir Prime.
The council fees have been paid in full. Our claim has been accepted and locked into the registry. The planet's officially ours.
A cheer erupted from the crew, a sound of pure joy and relief. Tavil allowed himself a smile, his scaled lips pulling back to reveal rows of sharp teeth. He stood from his chair and walked back to the viewing point, looking down once more at the beautiful blue and green world that now belonged to his species. Behind him, the crew celebrated, laughing and congratulating each other, making grand plans for their futures. None of them noticed the slight narrowing of Tavil's eyes as he studied the planet. None of them saw the way his clawed hand moved to his chin in a gesture of deep thought. None of them sensed the small, nagging doubt that still whispered at the edges of his mind. They had just claimed a planet from a species that didn't belong to the Galactic Council, though they didn't know it yet. The species that hadn't registered their world because they didn't think anyone would be crazy enough or arrogant enough or foolish enough to try and take it. The species that didn't leave security forces in orbit because they considered such precautions unnecessary. But none of the celebrating crew knew this. They were too busy counting their future fortunes, too busy dreaming of the glory that would come. They didn't understand that some treasures come with prices far higher than anyone could imagine paying. 9 local days had passed since that moment of triumph, and Captain Tavil found himself alone on the bridge of his ship. The vessel hovered still above the first settlement, a collection of prefabricated structures that had been shuttled down from the small fleet of colony ships that had arrived from their home planet. Vaxnir Prime wasted no time in capitalizing on the discovery, sending everything needed to establish a permanent presence. Construction crews, supplies, equipment, scientists, administrators, all had descended to the surface in waves, transforming one of those conveniently prepared sites into a bustling outpost. But Tavil had never left the ship. While the rest of the crew took rotations down to the surface, walking on solid ground for the first time in weeks, breathing unfiltered air, experiencing the triumph of their discovery firsthand, he had remained aboard, always watching, always monitoring, always waiting. It looked terrible, and he knew it. His scales had lost some of their luster, dulled by stress and poor nutrition. His orange eyes were rimmed with darkness. Below, on the planet's surface, the settlement had grown considerably. From orbit, it appeared as a small cluster of lights and structures. Supply runs continued at regular intervals, shuttles moving between the surface and the orbiting ships like industrious insects tending a hive. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The colonization was a success by every measurable metric. So why did he feel like he was standing on the edge of a precipice? Captain Tavil. The ship's AI broke the silence, its tone neutral and mechanical as always. Residual gravitational wave from spatial warping has been detected. Tavil's head snapped up, confusion flooding through him for a split second before his training kicked in. His boots pounded against the deck plates, his tail whipping behind him for balance as he practically threw himself into the sensor operator's chair. The screens displayed the familiar peaceful emptiness of the star system. The planet below, the other ships and their fleet scattered in various orbits, the distant sun, the asteroids in the outer system. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening, nothing that could account for gravitational distortions.
"AI," he barked out. "Where was the warping detected? Give me the coordinates, the distance, the vector, everything."
There was a microsecond pause as the AI processed his request. The position is impossible to triangulate precisely, Captain. There is too much noise in the readings. The gravitational distortion was detected across multiple sectors simultaneously, but the source location cannot be determined with accuracy.
"What do you mean there's too much noise?"
Tavil demanded, his eyes scanning the sensor displays desperately.
"What kind of noise? Interference? Jamming?"
Unknown, Captain. No other energy readings have been detected. No electromagnetic signatures. No thermal output. No radiation spikes. only the gravitational distortion, which lasted for approximately 0.3 milliseconds before dispelling. Tavil leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Gravitational warping meant only one thing in space: the presence of a warp drive. The fundamental technology that allowed faster-than-light travel by bending space-time itself. Something had just used a warp drive near their position. Something that was now invisible to every other type of sensor.
What is the possibility of this being a sensor error?
Calculating, the AI responded. A moment later, probability of sensor error is extremely low, Captain. 3 separate gravitational sensors reported identical readings at the same timestamp. Cross-referencing their data confirms the detection was genuine. Tavil sat frozen for a moment, his orange eyes fixed on the screens, but not really seeing them. Every instinct he possessed was screaming at him that something was wrong, that the threat that he'd been unconsciously anticipating had finally manifested.
Run every scan that we have,
he ordered, his voice tight.
Full spectrum analysis. Electromagnetic, thermal, radiation, visual, acoustic, everything. I need to know what is out there.
He spent the next several minutes conducting the most thorough sensor sweep he'd ever performed, pushing the ship's detection systems to their absolute limits. He scanned near space, far space, the planet's atmosphere, the other ships in the fleet. He checked and rechecked readings, searched for any anomaly that might explain what the gravitational sensors had detected. Nothing. The sky remained stubbornly empty of threats. If something was out there, it was using stealth technology far beyond anything Tavil had ever encountered or even heard of in his years of service. But that brief detection had been enough. Something was here. Something that didn't want to be seen. Tavil's claws drummed against the console as he made his decision. Better to be wrong and embarrassed than right and dead. He opened a ship-wide channel first.
All crew members, return immediately to the surface. This is Captain Tavil. Return to the ship immediately. I repeat, return to the ship immediately. This is not a drill. Shuttle pilots, begin emergency retrieval procedures now.
Then, he opened up a channel to the other ships in the fleet.
All vessels, this is Captain Tavil of Vaxnia Pioneer. Raise defensive shields and power up weapon systems. We have detected possible hostile presence in the system. I repeat, possible hostile presence. All ships to combat readiness status. Prepare for potential engagement.
The response was immediate. Through the viewing port, Tavil could see the other ships in the fleet beginning to shift their positions. Their hulls beginning to glow slightly as defensive shields powered up. On the planet below, shuttles would be firing their engines, racing to collect the crew members scattered across the settlement. Tense minutes passed. Tavil remained at the sensor station, his eyes flickering between the various displays in the viewing port, watching both the instruments and the stars themselves. Other crew members began arriving on the bridge, called by the alert, moving quickly to their stations and checking their equipment. The shuttles appeared as small, bright spots rising from the planet's surface, climbing through the atmosphere in pillars of thrust. But nothing else appeared. No attacking vessels materialized from the void. No weapons fire lanced through the darkness. No demands or communications arrived. "Captain!" One of the other ship commanders called over the comm channel, his voice hinting confusion. "This is Captain Resak of the Vaxnia Guardian. We're showing no contacts of any kind on our sensors. Can you confirm the nature of the threat?" Before Tavil could respond, another voice joined the channel.
Captain Tavil, this is Captain Morax of the Vaxner Defender. We've completed full system scans. There's nothing out here except us and the planet. Are you sure about this alert?
Tavil's jaw clenched. He could hear the skepticism in their voices. The unspoken question about whether their celebrated hero captain was cracking under stress. He pulled up the gravitational sensor logs again, staring at the brief spike in the data that had triggered the entire response.
I am certain that our sensors detected gravitational warping consistent with warp drive uses,
he replied, keeping his voice level and professional.
Whether the source has since departed or is employing advanced stealth technology, I cannot say. But I will not risk the fleet or the colony on the assumption that the reading was meaningless. Maintain combat readiness until I give the all-clear.
More shuttles docked with the Pioneer, the dull thuds of their connection reverberating through the hull. Crew members began filing onto the bridge.
Captain,
Kimchi said, appearing at Taville's side. The navigator's voice was pitched low, meant only for his commanding officer.
the crew is back on board. All personnel is accounted for. But, sir, we are not finding anything. Nothing unusual except that one gravitational spike minutes ago.
Taville turned to look at his navigator, seeing his own doubts reflected in those orange eyes. He opened his mouth to respond, to defend his decision, to explain the certainty he felt that something was wrong despite the lack of evidence. The words never came.
Captain!
The communications officer's voice cut through the bridge. "We're receiving a contact attempt!" Every head on the bridge swiveled toward the comm station. Taville felt his blood run cold, vindication and fear warring in his chest.
From who?
He demanded, already moving toward the communication station.
What ship? What location?
The communications officer's claws hovered over their console, her expression one of utter confusion. "Unknown caller, sir, and unknown location. I can't trace the signal's origin point. It's like it's coming from everywhere." Doubt flickered across the faces of the bridge crew. Several exchanged worried glances, clearly wondering if their systems were malfunctioning, if they were experiencing some kind of electronic warfare attack. "Sir," the communications officer continued, her voice uncertain, "should we accept the contact?" Taville stood rigid, his mind calculating probabilities and risks at lightning speed. This was it. This was the moment he'd been dreading since they'd first claimed this too-perfect planet.
Accept the call,
he ordered.
Route it to the main screen. All of you, maintain your posts and stay alert. Record everything.
The communications officer nodded and accepted the connection. The main tactical screen, which had been displaying the star system map and sensor readings, blinked and changed. Static washed across the display for a moment, then cleared to reveal an image that made every member of the bridge crew freeze in shock. The being that appeared on the screen was unlike any species Taville had ever encountered in his years of space travel. His form was generally bipedal and bilaterally symmetrical, familiar enough in base structure, but the details were alien in ways that were hard to articulate. It had no scales, no protective outer covering that Taville could see. Instead, its skin was smooth and pale, a strange pinkish tan color that looked almost fragile. It had hair only on the top of its head, a dark brown mass that seemed to serve no protective purpose. Its eyes were forward-facing and predatory, a striking blue color that seemed to pierce the screen. "Hello there," the being said as he smiled, and the translator implant in Taville's head rendered the alien language into comprehensible speech. "I have to say, you folks seem to be making yourselves pretty comfortable on your new planet. Nice work on the settlement. Very quick colonization, it seems." The joke, if it was meant to be a joke, fell completely flat on the stunned bridge crew. Taville found himself speechless for a moment, his prepared speeches about galactic law and rightful ownership dying on his tongue. Finally, he gathered himself, drawing on his command and training to maintain his composure.
I am Captain Taville of the Vaxnia species,
he said formally, deliberately ignoring the being's attempt at levity.
This planet now belongs to the Vaxnia people. The Galactic Council Registry has already recognized our ownership. Our claim is legitimate and legal under all relevant interstellar law.
He paused, letting the seriousness of those words settle, watching the alien's face for any reaction. The smile didn't waver. Beside him, Deville could sense his crew members staring at him with wide eyes, uncertain whether he was being brave or foolish by taking such a firm stance with this unknown species. The being on the screen appeared to find this hilarious. Its smile widened. "Oh, the almighty Galactic Council," the being said, his voice overflowing with irony. "Well, now I am terrified. However will we cope with the Council's disapproval?" The tone made it absolutely clear that this was mockery, that this being and its species gave not even a fraction of a consideration to the authority Tavil had just invoked. Tavil felt a chill run down his spine, despite the temperature-controlled environment of the bridge. The being's expression shifted, the mocking smile softening into something that might have been genuine friendliness. "I suppose you should see for yourselves the kind of hole that you put yourselves in. And then we can talk again. Figure out how you're going to extract yourselves from this mess with minimal embarrassment. Does that sound good?" Before Tavil could formulate a response, before he could demand explanations or issue threats or attempt to negotiate, the connection ended. The screen flickered back to the star system display. The bridge remained silent for a long moment, every crew member frozen in their positions, trying to process what they just witnessed. Tavil stood with his mouth slightly open, his prepared arguments unspoken, his mind struggling to make sense of an interaction that had deviated so dramatically from every first contact protocol he'd ever studied.
Captain?
Kamshi's voice broke the silence, pitched high.
What just happened? Who was that? What do we do now?
Tavil turned to respond, to offer some reassurance or guidance to his crew, to demonstrate the leadership they needed in this moment. But before he could speak, before he could even formulate a coherent thought about their next move, another voice cut through the bridge.
"Captain,"
said Sensors Officer.
"I'm detecting a ship. A ship that it just appeared. It's in the upper atmosphere, maybe a few kilometers from our position."
Every head whipped toward the sensor officer. Tavil lunged towards the sensor station, shoving the officer aside to see the displays himself. There, clear as day on the tactical screen, was a contact signature that definitely hadn't been there moments before. A ship, relatively small compared to their own vessels, but definitely real and definitely close. The sensor showed it hovering in the upper atmospheres of the planet, positioned between the fleet and the settlement below. The implications crashed through Tavil's mind like a wave. A ship that could hide from their sensors. A ship that could communicate from an untraceable location. A ship that could appear and disappear at will, manipulating space itself in ways that they didn't understand. But numbers still mattered. The Vaxnir fleet consisted of 7 ships, each armed with standard laser arrays and missile batteries. Even if this mysterious species had superior stealth technology, surely they couldn't withstand the combined firepower of an entire fleet.
"All ships!"
Tavil's voice rang out across the comms channels.
"Target the contact in the upper atmosphere. Prepare laser batteries for immediate firing. We have the advantage of numbers. Coordinate your firing solutions."
The bridge crew hesitated for just a moment, uncertainty flickering across their faces. They had just witnessed something that defied their understanding of physics and technology. But they were trained military personnel, and their captain had given a clear order. Hands moved, targeting systems locked onto the lone ship. Power flowed to weapon.
"Sir,"
the weapons officer reported, his voice tight.
"The AI has the hostile ship locked on the target. All laser batteries are charged to maximum and ready to fire on your command."
Through the viewing port, Tavil could see the other ships in the fleet adjusting their positions, bringing their weapon systems to bear on the same target. 7 ships. 7 sets of laser arrays against one vessel. No matter how stealthy, no matter how advanced, the mathematics of warfare were simple and brutal.
Fire!
Deville commanded.
Everything.
The weapons officer's claws struck the firing control. The Pioneer shuddered slightly as massive amounts of power discharged from the laser arrays mounted along its hull. Brilliant lances of coherent light shot toward the target. 6 other ships fired simultaneously, their own beams converging on the same point from multiple angles. The combined power was devastating, enough to vaporize an asteroid or punch through the heaviest shielding Tavil had ever heard of.
Maximum power confirmed across all batteries,
the weapons officer called out.
Direct firing solutions on target. Confirm contact.
What happened next would be seared into Deville's memory for the rest of his life.
By the ancestors,
the sensors officers breathed.
Captain, look at the screen.
The main tactical display had automatically switched to a high magnification view of the target area, enhanced by multiple sensor feeds and rendered in real time with perfect clarity. 7 laser beams, representing the combined might of the Vaxneer fleet, converged on the alien ship, and simply bent around it. The laws of physics that governed straight-line laser travel seemed to mean nothing. As each beam approached the target, space itself wrapped around the vessel, creating a bubble of distorted space that guided the deadly light harmlessly around the hull. The beams curved like water flowing around a stone, rejoining on the far side and continuing into empty space, having made precisely 0 contact with their intended target.
What?
Tavil couldn't finish the sentence. His mind refused to accept what his eyes were showing him.
Engineering the bridge.
Another voice cut through the comm, the ship's chief engineer sounding equally stunned.
Captain, I'm analyzing the energy readings from that ship. The mastery of space bending is completely off the charts. It's using its warp core to bend space around itself defensively. Sir, the mathematics involved, the power requirements, it feels like a dream.
Other voices joined in. Technicians and specialists from across the ship and fleet, all reporting variations of the same impossible truth.
The enemy ship is essentially invulnerable to laser fire, Captain,
the weapons officer said, his voice hollow with realization.
As long as it maintains that spatial distortion field, nothing that we shoot can make contact.
Tavil felt rage building in his chest, hot and fierce, desperate. They couldn't have come this far, risked this much, only to be thwarted by a single ship. There had to be a way. There had to be something they could do.
Missiles!
He roared, slamming his fist against the console.
They can bend space to deflect lasers, but they can't defend against explosive force. Concentrated detonations, shrapnel, pressure waves. You can't redirect those with spatial manipulation.
He activated the fleet-wide channel again.
All ships, prepare missile batteries. We're going to launch everything we have in a coordinated strike. Convergent vectors, simultaneous detonation. The spatial distortion might protect against direct energy, but it cannot protect against the entire area around them exploding at once.
Acknowledged, came the responses from the other captains.
Locking targeting solutions,
the weapons officer called out.
All missile batteries loaded and ready. Fleet reports ready status.
Fire!
Tavil commanded.
Everything! Now!
The Pioneer lurched as missile batteries along its hull all released their payloads. Through the viewing port, Tavil could see the trails of propellant as dozens of missiles streaked away from the ship, their targeting systems locked onto the enemy vessel. The other 6 ships in the fleet did the same, launching their own ordnance in a perfectly coordinated barrage. The space between the fleet and the target vessel filled with deadly projectiles, over 100 missiles converging from multiple angles, their engines burning bright as they accelerated to attack speed. Tavil watched the tactical display with his heart hammering in his chest, counting down the seconds until impact. 3, 2, 1. The sensors officer's voice rose to a scream.
Captain, I'm detecting spatial anomalies. Multiple space tears forming around the target.
The tactical display showed it clearly, though Tavil's mind struggled to accept the reality of what he was witnessing. Around the alien ship, space itself was tearing open. Not metaphorically, not approximately. Actual rifts in the fabric of space-time. Dark wounds in reality itself that yawned open like hungry mouths. The edges of these tears rippled with energies that made the sensors scream warnings about readings that exceeded their calibration parameters. And then, in the microsecond before the missiles would have struck, they vanished. Every single warhead, over 100 deadly projectiles, simply disappeared into those spatial fissures, as if they'd never existed at all. The tears sealed shut instantly, space healing itself with the snap that the sensors detected as a massive gravitational pulse. The alien ship remained exactly where it had been, untouched, unharmed, as if nothing had happened. For one heartbeat, the bridge was silent. For one blessed moment, Tavil allowed himself to hope that the missiles had simply been destroyed. Then, new tears opened in space. Not around the alien ship, around each of the Vaxnir vessels.
Brace for impact!
Someone screamed, but there was no time at all. The missiles reappeared, erupting from the spatial rifts that had opened mere meters from each Vaxnir ship's hull. Every warhead they had fired, redirected with seemingly impossible accuracy, materialized beside the vessels that had launched them. The alien ship had opened portals in space itself, had caught their missiles in one location and released them in another, had turned their overwhelming firepower back against them. The detonations came simultaneously, a chain of explosions that lit up orbital space like a string of newborn stars. The shockwaves hammered through the Pioneer's hull despite the defensive shields, throwing crew members from their stations, shorting out systems, cracking viewports. Alarms screamed from every console. The ship tumbled in space, its stabilization systems overwhelmed by the force of the nearby detonations. Through the chaos and the flashing warning lights and the smoke that was beginning to fill the bridge, Tavil caught glimpses through the viewing port of what was happening to the rest of the fleet. The Vaxnir Guardian, the closest ship to them, had taken a direct hit. Its shields had collapsed under the barrage, and its hull had been breached in multiple locations. The Vaxnir Courage was breaking apart, its superstructure unable to withstand the stress of multiple hull breaches. Tavil watched in horror as the ship's spine buckled, folding in on itself with the slow grace of a collapsing building. Secondary explosions bloomed along its length as power systems failed catastrophically. 5 ships destroyed in seconds. Destroyed by their own weapons, turned against them by a mastery of space manipulation so complete, so overwhelming, that it made a mockery of everything Tavil understood about physics and warfare. The alien ship had caught their missiles in artificial wormholes and spat them back out, had used the fundamental fabric of reality itself as a weapon. The heavens themselves had shaken from the violence. Space, which should have been stable and constant, had been torn open and sealed shut multiple times in rapid succession. The gravitational sensors were going insane, detecting waves of space-time distortion that rippled outward from each portal like expanding circles on water. Silence fell over the Pioneer's bridge. Not the silence of discipline or concentration, but the silence of absolute shock, of minds unable to process what they had just witnessed, of souls confronted with their own utter insignificance. Through the smoke and the flickering emergency lights, crew members stared at their consoles, or at each other, with expressions of pure horror. Some were crying. Others sat frozen, mouths hanging open, eyes wide and unseeing. Tavil stood in the center of his bridge, his uniform torn and scorched, blood running from a cut on his scaled forehead where he had been thrown against a console during the explosions. The mathematics of warfare, Tavil thought with a kind of numb detachment, meant nothing when your enemy could use space itself as a weapon. "Captain," Kamchi's voice was low. The navigator had pulled himself back to his station, clutching a broken arm against his chest.
Oh, what do we do now?"
Before Tavil could answer, before he could even begin to formulate a response to a situation so far outside his experience that he had no reference points at all, the communications officer spoke up.
"Sir,"
She said, her voice shaking.
"they're contacting us again."
Every eye on the bridge turned toward Tavil. He could see the fear in those gazes, the desperate hope that their captain would somehow have an answer, would somehow find a way out of this nightmare. But he had nothing. He was empty, hollowed out by the realization of how completely they were outmatched.
Put him through,
he said, his voice flat and lifeless. The main screen activated. The alien being's face appeared once more. The same smooth skin, the same blue eyes, the same military bearing. But the expression was different now. The amusement was gone, replaced by something more serious, more businesslike. "Allow me to introduce myself properly this time," he said. "I am Captain Richard Stone of the Human Expansion Mission. I represent Earth and humanity's interests in this region of space." The being, Captain Stone, Tavil corrected himself numbly, leaned forward slightly in his chair. "Now, here's what's gonna happen. Your species is gonna contact the Galactic Council and formally withdraw your claim to this planet. You're gonna cite a surveying error, a misunderstanding, or whatever bureaucratic excuse lets everyone save face. You're gonna send a written apology to Earth acknowledging that this world belongs to humanity. And then you're gonna leave the system, and you are never gonna come back. Do all that, and we'll just call this an unfortunate incident, and we're gonna move on with our lives. Does that sound reasonable?" Tavil wanted to stay silent. He wanted to maintain some shred of dignity, to refuse to acknowledge the complete and utter defeat they had suffered. But his crew needed him to be a leader, not a martyr. They needed him to find some way, any way, to salvage something from this disaster. He tried, even though he knew it was futile, even though he knew it was pathetic. He tried to find some leverage, some bargaining position.
We have lost too much to go home simply with nothing,
Tavil said, and he hated how weak his voice sounded, how defeated.
5 ships destroyed, hundreds of crew dead. Our people spent enormous resources in the colonization effort. The threat of war between our species still has to mean something, no matter how advanced your technology is. We are not without allies. We are not without our own military strength across our territory. You can't simply dismiss us as if we are nothing.
The look on Captain Stone's face made it clear exactly what he thought of Tavil's attempt at negotiation. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even contempt. It was something worse. It was indifference. The look someone might give to an insect that was still struggling after being swatted, making threats with its tiny mandibles. "Let me be very clear about something," Stone said. His voice had gone cold, all pretense of diplomacy abandoned. "I don't give a single fuck about threats of war. I'm not an admiral. I'm not a fleet commander. I'm just one captain with one ship out here doing a survey mission. Now, do you understand what that means?" The human leaned back in his chair, and something in his expression sent ice through Tavil's veins. "Earth's fleet numbers in the thousands. Thousands of ships, Captain. We've been doing this, exploring, expanding, fighting, well, probably longer than you've had fire.
We take part in military actions every month, so wars are nothing new to humanity. They're practically routine. So when you threaten me with war, what you're actually doing is giving my government an excuse to not just take this one planet, right, but probably this entire area. And is that what you really want?
The silence in the Pioneer's bridge was absolute. Even the damaged system seemed to quiet their alarms, as if the ship itself was listening to the humans' words and understanding their implication. Thousands of ships, if what the human said was true. If his species truly commanded a fleet of that size, then the Vaxneer's entire military force wouldn't even qualify as a minor skirmish in humanity's eyes. The technology demonstration they'd just witnessed, the spatial manipulation, the perfect defensive field, the ability to open wormholes and redirect weapons. If that was standard equipment on their ships, then humanity could sweep across Vaxneer space like a storm, and there would be nothing anyone could do to stop them.
I
Tavil's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again.
understand. We will withdraw our claim. I will take full responsibility for this incident with my people. We will compensate Earth for any inconvenience we've caused.
The human's expression softened, the cold indifference replaced by something that might have been approval or respect.
Good choice. Smart choice. See? We can be reasonable when everyone acts like adults.
He smiled, though it didn't quite reach those blue eyes.
Of course, you'll take full responsibility. Well, but I appreciate you being straightforward about it. All makes everything easier.
Captain Stone stood up from his chair, preparing to end the communication, but then he paused, as if remembering something, and that earlier amusement returned to his face.
Oh, and one more thing that you should probably know about that planet.
Tavil waited, dreading whatever revelation was coming next.
You wouldn't have liked it here anyway,
Stone said cheerfully.
You see, the thing about terraforming is it's not just about making the air breathable and the water clean, but no, you have to establish entire ecosystems, balance food chains, predator-prey relationships. We introduced some pretty impressive predators to keep the herbivore populations in check. Oh, and the insects. So we needed insects for pollination and decomposition, all the good stuff. Some of them are pretty nasty. Good thing your people didn't stay long enough to encounter them. There would have been a lot more casualties than just the ships.
The human smile widened.
I just thought you should know what you're giving up. Although honestly, given what I seen in your biology, I don't think your species would have survived a single season here.
And with that final casual cruelty, the communication ended. The screen went dark, leaving the devastated bridge crew to sit in the ruins of their ambitions and stare at the place where the human's face had been. In the end, the Vaxneer left with nothing. The two surviving ships, the Pioneer and the badly damaged Glory, limped out of the system 3 days later, their holds empty, their crews decimated, their hopes crushed. The colonists on the surface had been evacuated in an atmosphere of confusion and bitter disappointment, leaving behind equipment and structures that they'd worked so hard to establish. Everything of value was abandoned. The investment was total loss. When they returned to Vaxneer space, there was no hero's welcome. There was no promotion for Captain Tavil. There were no ships awarded to his crew, no positions of honor, no names recorded in historical archives except as warnings. Instead, there were investigations, tribunals, demands for accountability. The heavens had shaken when the Earth ship arrived. But the shockwaves that rippled through the galaxy afterward were not waves of force or destruction. They were waves of understanding, of realization, a lesson learned at a terrible cost. The Vaxneer discovered that there were species out there that didn't need the Galactic Council's protection, because they were the ones that others needed protection from. Species that terraformed worlds and left them unguarded because no one would dare to touch what was theirs. species that counted thousands of warships in their fleet and spoke of wars like scheduled maintenance. And the Vaxnir had learned to be grateful that humanity had chosen mercy over annihilation. They had learned that sometimes the greatest victory is simply being allowed to retreat with your life intact, even if your pride lies shattered at their feet. That was the lesson Captain Tavil learned in that distant system along the intergalactic arm. That was the price that he and his crew paid for reaching toward a treasure that was never theirs to claim. And that was the warning that spread throughout Vaxnir space and beyond, whispered from ship to ship, from species to species. When you find a perfect world sitting unclaimed and unguarded, don't ask yourself why no one has taken it. Ask yourself, what kind of species leaves their treasures unguarded because they know no one would be foolish enough to try? The answer, as Tavil could have testified, was not one that you wanted to learn firsthand.